Hello there, everyone. So today I'm here with Dr. Michael Breus, and we wrote this book, The Sleeper, together. And
Yep.
just as a quick little story as to how we met.
Yeah.
We were both we're both in this group where we were like basically crazy entrepreneurs doing crazy entrepreneur things. And it was the first time I had traveled post COVID. And I wasn't really looking forward to traveling because I'm kind of a homebody, even in the best of circumstances. And now I'm like, okay, I got to leave my house. And most of the world is still shut down. But they had rented out an entire little boutique hotel in New Orleans. And it was like, okay, well, we'll be safe in this little cadre of people.
Right.
And I felt like for the first time, I'm going to play full out because I go to bed early. I wake up early. But this is a group that likes to party a little bit, and they have great live music and food, and I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna stay up, but no matter what time I go to bed, I wake up at the same damn time, which now these days is around 4 a.m. Back then it was 5 a.m. And so I was like, we hadn't met, and we're sitting on like these adjacent couches, and I'm just waiting for my Lyft to get there and take me to the airport. And so I strike up a conversation, and I'm talking about like how I just wish I could sleep in because I stayed up until midnight last night, and it didn't do me well because I woke up at 5. And after listening to me bitch about my sleeping for a couple of very patient minutes, you said, well, you know what? You have a circadian rhythm that people pay a lot of money to achieve. So A+ on your sleeping. And it was the first time in my life where I actually felt good about my sleep instead of like, because normally I think, oh, that's a deficit. Like I can't sleep in. And from then on, and it's not like I wake up tired. I wake up ready to go. I'm excited. I'm ready to create as soon as I wake up. And that was the first time I felt like, you know what? That's a superpower. So then that was it. Then we ran into each other at the airport, and a couple of years later, this book is here. So that was just a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun to like dig deeper into sleep because the whole premise here is there's a lot of stories about sleep out there.
Oh yeah.
I think that we can all agree the coolest one is probably Inception, but
for sure.
It's like, where is the one where there's actual sleep science? And that lit both of us up. The idea that we could write a fictional thriller, but that really paid attention to the science. So we're just here as now some of these questions I already know the answers to because we wrote a book together. So they're not surprises, but it's still, I think, a conversational interview here, so people can learn more about sleep is exactly the goal. So.
Yeah.
Let's just get started.
Yeah. So real quick, I want to tell everybody the other side of the story.
Yeah, I'd love that. I've never heard the other side.
So the other side of the story is we're sitting on these couches, and I did go to bed early and did get up early because I am not the party guy.
What time do you go to bed normally?
So believe it or not, I actually go to bed a little bit later normally. Between 11:30 and 12 usually is kind of my normal bedtime. I get up around 6:15. So that's kind of I guess early isn't what I would say I did on that weekend. I just wasn't into like live music, big crowds. So I am kind of watching movies in my room.
It's a bit overwhelming.
It is a bit overwhelming for sure. But I sat down and a mutual friend of ours introduced us. And he said, I want to introduce you to my friend who writes like 20, 30 books a year. And I'm like, what? How does somebody write 20, 30 books a year? Right. And he was talking about your company. And when we sat down, I had a goal in mind. You may not realize this, but I had a goal in mind. I've always wanted to write a fiction kind of, techno-thriller, Michael Crichton-esque thing that had to do with sleep science because I love those books. I've been a huge fan for many, many years. And when I met you, I was just like, it was like the sun was rising behind you. And I was like, that's my guy. I'm going to do something really cool. And we ended up working together and forming this book, which is kind of amazing when you think about it, because we were both a little surprised that very few people have actually gone into the sleep science of it all. Yeah. And so the goal here was to have a fun, entertaining story, but real science, just kind of similar to the way Michael Crichton does things in order to kind of get people jazzed about sleep. So it was a real bucket list moment for me. This is a bucket list moment for me as well to get the opportunity to put out a fiction book. So I hope everybody enjoys it. And we're going to do an interview now to talk about the science that's in the book and to just answer some general questions overall about sleep.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I love hearing the other side of that story. I've told my version of that a dozen times or so, and never had the benefit of hearing the other side. So
there you go. Now you know.
So what got you interested in sleep medicine and dreams in the first place?
Okay. So nobody that I know of wakes up one day and says, I'm going to be a sleep doctor. Okay. Like it just doesn't seem to work out that way. So I had a very unique path. I was originally, so just to give everybody my background, which you might know, is I have a Ph.D. in clinical psychology. And what I was doing during my clinical psychology days was I was interested in sports psychology. So I've never had much in the way of athletic talent. Just want to be honest. I was always the last one chosen on the team.
Me too, dude. Me too. That's why I write.
Exactly. That's why I write. And so I'm like, oh, this is going to be tough, but maybe I can work with the athletes and like use my brain power to help them because all the really, beautiful people hang out with the athletes. So I was like, this could be cool. It could be social. It could be fun. But to be fair, the best sports psychology program in the country where you do your residency. So you do 4 years and then you do a residency similar to a medical doctor was in Jackson, Mississippi. And they only accepted people who went to Princeton and Harvard and Yale. Okay. I not only, but mostly. And I went to the University of Georgia. It was a top 20 program, but it wasn't Yale. And I knew I wasn't going to get in. And this was a very highly coveted program within sports psychology, but they had a sleep rotation that they were trying to fill. And I had worked my way through graduate school in the electrophysiology department. So I'm the weirdo that likes to take apart the EKG machine and the EEG machine and put them back together. And I knew how to use all the sleep machines. So I sold myself as a sleep guy, thinking that once I get there, I'm going to transfer, right? Because just because you're not letting me in through the front door doesn't mean I'm not going to figure out how to get into your door. It just means you're not going to let me in through the front door. Got accepted, got there day one, raised my hand. Hey, when can I transfer? And they said, Dr. Breus, they said, we had a feeling you were going to do this. Your entire funding is based on you taking this position for at least 6 months. So if you want to have an apartment and you have food, you're going to do this for 6 months and then you can go wherever you want in our program. I'm like, great. How tough can this be? It's sleep, right? I mean, I do it every night. By the third day, I absolutely fell in love with clinical sleep medicine, and I knew my path was never going to change. I get the opportunity to help people like this. It's unbelievable. When you're a clinical psychologist and you're working with somebody with, let's say, depression or anxiety, it can take months, years even for them to show any advancement in a positive direction. With sleep, I can literally change people's lives overnight. And that just was so cool. I just completely fell in love with it. And 24 years later, I've been a sleep doctor the whole time.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I think that's the promise you make, like on your website, right? Like I can, like the best night's sleep you've had, not ever, but like, right. What's the exact promise?
So the goal is that we can give everybody a better night's sleep, right? It might not be the best, but we can make it happen fast. Because so many people do things that they don't even realize are having an effect on their sleep. And so that's the goal is, I'm not here to tell people, oh, turn off every television by 9 o'clock and go to bed in pitch dark and don't have any animals in your bed and all the non-fun stuff. That's not me. I'm the guy that's like, let's figure it out. Like, if you like to sleep with 3 bulldogs in your bed, okay, I'm fine with that as long as they're not waking up your bed partner all night long, causing a big problem. We're in good shape. So I'm much more the practical based guy versus the, you've got to follow every rule out there.
Well, that makes a lot of sense because people are individual. So bespoke advice makes sense. So what are your exact credentials?
So my exact credentials are, I have a Ph.D. in clinical psychology, but I am actually medically board certified in clinical sleep disorders. So you might be saying, he's a Ph.D., is he an M.D.? Like, what is he? So I actually took the medical boards without going to medical school and passed. I'm one of 168 people in the world that have ever done
Wow,
it.
congratulations. That's amazing.
Thanks. Thanks. And that's kind of what gave me this sort of almost encyclopedic knowledge of sleep, is because I was studying for a medical board and I hadn't been to medical school. So I studied for a year. And I read every textbook and did everything. And so for me, the goal was to really understand sleep, both from the biology, but also from the psychology.
Wow, I'm still stuck on the 168 people in the world. That's amazing. So how long have you been a sleep specialist now?
So we just calculated it up. I think it's 24 years that I've been in practice. My practice started in Georgia, which is where I'm from. I'm from Sandy Springs, Georgia, which is a small suburb just outside Atlanta. Then I practiced for 11 years in Scottsdale, Arizona. And now I'm just outside of Los Angeles in the South Bay area. It's called Manhattan Beach, Hermosa Beach.
And Long Beach.
Yep, you know it well. And what's nice about what I do now is, most sleep doctors, they kind of have to lay hands on a patient because they're treating apnea or narcolepsy or things like that. My area has been looking at troubled sleep and insomnia. So a lot of what I can do can be done just like what we're doing now, which is talking over Zoom.
Ah, that's so great. So, okay, we can agree that the book is scientifically accurate, right?
Correct.
Okay, and that is our big joy, our big feather in the cap on this book, is that we wrote a successful thriller. It ticks all those boxes, but the sleep science is accurate. So let's talk about like some of the details there. Like, what are dreams? Like, we all have dreams, but what are dreams?
So this is such a great topic to go into. And I think almost everybody universally wants the answer to these questions, right? So I define dreams as emotional metabolism. So let me unpack that. Let me double click on that for just a second. So there's two big processes that we know during REM sleep, which is when 80% of the time is when you're dreaming. We know that it does two things. One is it helps consolidate memory. So what that means is it's moving information from your short-term memory to your long-term memory. So the way I think of it, it's kind of like moving things to your, from your hard disk to the cloud, right? It's like it's permanent, it's there, it's forever. That's one of the functions. But there's a second function. The second function is to process emotions. And all of the emotions that you have throughout the daytime have to get processed. And if they don't, during the dream state, they come back to you sometimes as anxiety, as depression, as all these different things. And so dreams are a manifestation in our head. It's a hallucination almost, right? Because it's not real, of our emotions and sort of what's going on in the process of working through those emotions. So a lot of people ask me questions like, well, if I dream about this, do I hate my mother or something like that, And so the dreams, we're not really at that stage. And I would argue that nobody is. Dream interpretation is very much a hokey pokey, not really scientific universe out there, okay? Now, there is something that is done with dreams that is very scientific and therapeutic, and that's called dream therapy. So dream therapy is where, for example, and I'm learning now, I'm actually taking a year-long course because of this book to learn how to become a dream therapist, because it's a little bit different than what my training was. But we use the dream as an environment for working out problems, right? So when somebody has a dream that's recurrent, it means that they're not emotionally processing something. So then we can bring them into session, explore the dream together, and then start to move forward inside of this session. And then guess what? It makes its way into the dream at night. And then people start thinking normally, and then they start to sleep normally. So it's really quite fascinating to understand how much dreams have an effect on our physiology as well as our emotionality.
So what are nightmares? Are nightmares like just bad dreams, or are they fundamentally different?
They are fundamentally different, but they are bad dreams. And so these are dreams that have such a emotional, discomforting content that they wake you up. That is actually the definition of a nightmare, is it has to wake you up in some form of panic or fright, or you're running away or something like that.
So if I just have a terrible dream that's just really, really bad, but I sleep through it and I remember it in the morning, that's not technically a nightmare?
Correct. That is not technically a nightmare. And here's what's interesting is when people wake up, the emotional processing stops. So this is why nightmares repeat themselves, which is kind of fascinating when you think about it, is you wake up and then your body has to get back into sleep. And then you basically go back to the beginning of the dream and you're processing. And then, oh shit, there's something bad happening. I wake up. Now you stopped processing. And so this is the repetitive nature of a nightmare, is this awakening stops the emotional processing and you don't get through it. See, if you have a bad dream, but you get all the way through it, you actually still gain something because you processed some part of it. If you have the dream again, you might get further in the dream, or it might have a little bit different meaning for you, or things like that.
So the only way to technically fix a nightmare then is to turn it into a dream, to deal with it. Wow, that's
exactly right. That's a perfect analogy. That's exactly how you should think about it. So one of the treatments that we have utilized in the past is called imagery rehearsal therapy, or IRT. So what people do is they take the nightmare and they write it down. Every detail they can think of, every little itty bitty thing that they can think of, especially the ending when it gets really, really bad enough for them to wake up, like somebody's about to attack me with a knife or shoot me with a gun or whatever. And then they change the ending. So that they go from being the victim to the victor. So instead of being passive, now they are active in this process and they can overcome.
So basically so this is like combining your skill set and my skill set. Basically what you do is become an author. Like you come in, you rewrite your own story, and then you deal with it in the dream. That's really, really cool.
Yeah, well, here's what's interesting is if you read your story 4 or 5 times before bed with the new ending, within 3 to 5 nights, the ending in your dream changes.
That's fantastic.
So you do exactly what you just said, is you turn your nightmare into a dream, and now you can process it and move forward. Exactly.
Okay, so what is REM behavior disorder?
Okay, so REM behavior disorder is something that occurs during this particular stage of sleep called REM sleep, but is very, very different than what we've been talking about so far. REM behavior disorder, which by the way is a real disorder, I've treated
We
several.
did not make this up for the book.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. This is a real thing out there, scientifically valid and accurate, where during REM sleep, many people don't know this, but your body is paralyzed. And this is in order for you to not act out your dreams. In REM behavior disorder, people actually act out their dreams. Okay. So, and I can tell you,
pretty terrifying in real life.
it is pretty terrifying. I'll tell you a quick story about a patient I had that had REM behavior disorder, the first one I ever treated. So, as I said, I'm from Sandy Springs, Georgia, which is a decent sized hunting community. And if you're a hunter and you shoot a doe, you know that you either have to slit its throat or crack its neck. It's the most humane thing to do if you don't kill it. So this man woke up one night with his wife's head ready to snap her neck. I'm not kidding. So here's the first question that I always get asked. Did he kill her? So the good news is,
no. I just want to know if he shit his hands. Like, oh my God.
Yeah, the good news is no lives have been spared for the telling of this story. The second question I always get asked is, are they still married? Yes, they are. She is an incredibly patient woman. But
she would have to be.
She would. Here's the most interesting aspect of the whole story. Is number one is, a lot of people don't know this, but REM behavior disorder is a precursor for Parkinson's syndrome. 35% of cases. And so in this case, it was. And so what we were able to do by just knowing and understanding that he had this weird behavior in his sleep of acting out these dreams, we got him to neurology almost 10 years ahead of any Parkinsonian symptoms. And so we were able to institute early treatment, preventative stuff to make his quality of life be significantly better moving forward. And he didn't kill his wife. He wasn't, any of that stuff in the middle of the night. So it was really quite fascinating. REM behavior disorder is not as uncommon as people might think, but a lot of people mix it up with sleepwalking versus REM behavior disorder.
And the version that we have in the book is pretty complex. Right?
Absolutely.
So is that possible? Is that like the complexity of those behaviors possible?
Believe it or not, it is. And that was one of the things that we really wanted to get right in the book is, could somebody actually do this? Like, is this stuff even possible to do? I have treated people who have driven cars in their sleep.
Wow.
I have treated people who have actually gone to a drive-through, ordered food, okay, and then ate the food and fell asleep in the parking lot, right? I've had patients who go
My
into
mom could probably do that.
I mean, it depends on how late it is, any munchies. But, like at the end of the day, you can do some incredibly complicated behaviors in your sleep. There's even something called sex somnia, where some people will actually have sex in their sleep. They're not even aware that they're doing it. And sometimes their partner could consider that to be rape. They could, I mean, there's all kinds of things that could happen there. So the complexity of the behaviors is real, number one. And number two, this is an interesting case. And it was kind of pulled from a couple of different kind of ideas that I had seen in my clinical practice over the course of time and things like that. So it's pretty amazing, but it's for real.
Okay. And how about lucid dreaming? Is lucid dreaming for real? And what is that?
Okay. So in Inception, the movie, which is probably the closest to anything that we've got out there. And by the way, they were really off on their science. Is lucid dreaming is the ability to wake up inside of a dream. So becoming conscious while you're in the dream state. So first of all, this is a skill, and almost anybody, if they want to, can learn how to lucid dream.
Is it an easy skill or a difficult skill?
Well, I would have to say that you have to be...
Or does it depend on who you are?
Yes, exactly. So if you're like us, kind of creative, imaginative, like to stay up late, not you, but me, though we are the types of people that have a tendency to do well in that environment. But if you're not, probably not.
Okay. So how do you learn to lucid dream?
So if you want to learn to lucid dream, there are courses on it. One of the first things that I tell people to do is to just tell yourself right before bed, hey, I'd like to wake up while dreaming, right? Hey, I'd like to wake up while dreaming. So you set an intent, right? And I know this sounds goofy and a little woo-woo and all this non-science stuff, but there's actually at least 3 research papers showing that there's a defined method by which you can teach people to lucid dream. So one of them is you kind of set up the circumstance in your head, like I'd like to lucid dream. Another one is something called glutathione, which is a supplement, is something that people can take, which increases the likelihood of lucid dreaming. Not a lot, but a little. Also, you have to have an alarm. You can use an alarm bell that will wake you up in REM. But one of the easiest methods is to just take your hand and put an X across the back of it. And every hour, look at your hand and see that there's an X. Every hour, look at your hand and see that there is an X. Eventually, you're going to look at your hand and there's not going to be an X. And that's because you're looking at your hand while you're dreaming.
Wow, that's amazing. So how is there any distinction between what feels like real life and what feels like a dream? If you're truly lucid dreaming, does that feel real?
It feels real, except the laws of physics are out the door. There are 2 incredibly popular lucid dreams out there. One is flying. The other is sleeping with a supermodel. Those are the 2 most popular ones. Not surprising, but very different than obviously what your real world would be. But when you're in the dream and you're looking around, you recognize that it's a dream, but it's very realistic. As an example, you might be flying, but you're flying over your neighborhood. It looks exactly like your neighbor. You know what I'm saying? Like it's very detailed in those ways.
So if you do things like, let's say you rob a bank, or you cheat on your spouse, or you do something like this, do you wake up with like residual guilt because the emotions of going through those things are real? Or is it you wake up and you're like, well, that was a very real feeling experience, but it was clearly a dream, and so therefore I don't need to feel guilty. But like guilt is also something we can control. So how deep is that?
So it really depends upon if you're the dreamer or the person lying next to the dreamer, right? So if you're the person lying next to the dreamer, you're not really happy that your bed partner is dreaming about being with somebody else. So my advice as both a clinical psychologist and as a sleep specialist is, if you have a dream that you're sleeping with somebody else, shut up, okay? Don't tell your partner, all right? It's not a good idea. There's no universe you can come back from it for, because you didn't create it yourself. You didn't make it happen, and it's happening. They're going to blame you for it in one way, shape, or form or another. So do yourself a favor, and probably not the best idea to discuss. If you do have a super open relationship and you do want to discuss it, here's kind of the route to take, which is, hey, I had this dream. It was sort of strange to me, and I want to kind of get it off my chest and talk with you about it, and make sure that your partner is somebody who's open and honest and understands, hey, this was a dream. This wasn't a fantasy. This wasn't I want to do this. This was an uncontrolled, unconscious dream. Maybe there's something that we could explore here that might be worthwhile.
Can you really communicate with a dreamer while they're sleeping?
You can. So I worked on a project where we were able to create a communication tool that we could communicate to the dreamer. Now, I want to be clear. It wasn't like Inception. I wish it was that cool. What we were able to do was before people would go to sleep, we would pair a tone with an environment. So one was paired with flying and one was paired with race car driving. And then we would have the person go to sleep. And then we would have them wearing a special eye mask that would, when we were monitoring their brain waves, we knew they were in REM sleep. We would flash lights inside the mask, which would start to wake them up and then put them right back to sleep. And then they were lucid. So it's a really interesting kind of process of what people kind of had to go through to do it, but it's definitely possible. And we now know that there are more and more people who are starting to put products out on the market that are interested in being able to, teach people more about the lucid dream itself.
Have people been arrested and or acquitted for crimes that they committed while they were sleeping?
Yes, but one of each. So believe it or not, there is something called the sleepwalker murder cases.
Okay.
So when you were asking me the question about complex behaviors before, one of the things I wanted to highlight and let people understand is not only during REM behavior disorder, which is the primary topic of our book, but also during sleepwalking, there is some very complicated behaviors that people can do. And quite frankly, they do all kinds of crazy stuff.
So how does sleep quality, overall, affect mental and physical health?
So if your sleep quality is lower, you're not going to be doing well. Literally everything you do better with a good night's sleep. And on the emotional side of things, I don't think that could be more true than even on the physical side of things. Because on the physical side of things, I can muster up enough energy, to go do something. But sometimes, if you have depression and you're not sleeping well, your depression's much worse.
Yeah.
And so you really have to think through this from a quality standpoint. And so what I tell people all the time is, don't tell me about the minutes or the hours that you're sleeping. Tell me, how do you feel when you wake up? Yeah. Do you feel refreshed when you wake up within 2 or 3 minutes without a cup of coffee, right? If you can feel refreshed within, let's say, 5 minutes of waking up, having maybe had a glass of water, no caffeine, your sleep is probably just fine, right? But if it's not, and you're waking up and you're feeling like you're dragging ass and it's not fun and all this, then you probably have a quality issue. Every single system in your body works based on higher quality sleep. So when you give it low quality sleep, every system starts to slow down and not work nearly as well.
Yeah, that's something I've really come to understand in just the last year or so. Actually, so I wear an R, and you were one of the deciding factors. I'd seen him around, but I'm like, okay, this guy knows his sleep. He's wearing one. It's worth it. So I've worn one ever since. I think I'm on 2 years now that I've been wearing this. And it was I know that if I'm going through something and it's affecting my sleep and I wake up, I still wake up ready to go, but it is more sluggish, and it's so much harder to be creative. It's so much harder to just I'm highly productive in the amount that I create per year. But if my sleep is affected, then something that takes me 1 hour will take me 3, no doubt about it. And it wasn't until the Aura Ring where I could really see the difference between quality and quantity, because there are nights when I'm like, okay, I've slept 7 to 9 hours, and it's okay. And there's times when I've slept 5 hours
and you're zooming.
Yes, I have an hour. It's the REM and the deep sleep. So if I have an hour of REM and an hour of deep sleep, I'm good. But if I'm in bed for 7 hours, but I only had so a couple of weeks ago, I had just a miserable night's sleep. I had 3 minutes of deep sleep, but I was actually down for 7 hours or something. So it was just miserable sleep. But I think we're trained, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of sleep, 8 hours of sleep. And that's never been true for me. I don't sleep 8 hours.
Yeah. To be clear, neither do I. Right.
Yeah. So, I did the math earlier, which I go to bed at 11:30, 12. I wake up at 6. That's not a lot of sleep, and you're the sleep doctor. So
I have had
really
no
is.
caffeine today, and this is my level of energy, right? So what we know is the body will get what the body needs, right? And so the way I think about it is, if let's say you're running a marathon, you're probably not at the exact same speed on every mile, right?
Right.
You start up, with more energy, and then it might be maybe it tails down, then we bring it up. The same holds true with sleep. In a given week, your body might not need 25% REM every single night because of something else that's going on. So I always tell people, you got to trust your body, right? As long as you're not doing stuff to make sure your body doesn't do what it's supposed to do, like having 3 cups of coffee before bed, having 3 glasses of alcohol before bed, things that we know are going to have a major effect on sleep. Trust your body. If you're not getting, the deepest sleep, there's a reason. Like your body sleep does a great job of kind of giving a warning signal for something else that could be going on, whether that's emotional or physical. And so I tell people all the time, if you wake up and you feel like crap, there's probably a reason.
What are the most common misconceptions about sleep? Because I think sleep is like mysterious for a lot of us.
Oh yeah.
Like what are the things that people believe that's bullshit?
Well, okay, so we've covered a few of them. Number 1, 8 hours is a myth. Okay, that just isn't real. I mean, very few people need exactly 8 hours of sleep. I would say number 2, coffee is a substitute for sleep. It's not. Let me be clear, it doesn't really work that way. Mother Nature is a bitch. So if you don't get your sleep, she's going to come back and she's going to make sure that you do, or feel like you need to. I also think that the discussion of quantity versus quality, I think is really a very mythical for people, because let's be fair, you close your eyes, you have very little idea of what's going on in this unit. You open them 5, 6, 7, 8 hours later in the hopes that some magic has occurred in the middle of the night and is restorative and making me feel good, right? And so it is a very mysterious area. And so what I like to have people do is, if you're not sleeping well, is educate yourself, right? So learn more about sleep, understand more. I mean, I've got a great website, thesleepdoctor.com. If people want to learn about sleep, swing over there. I mean, I've got so many videos and articles, it'd be impossible for you not to learn something. And start to educate yourself, because a lot of the myths out there are really just due to misinformation, people not really understanding. I'll tell you a great example. I work with a professional football player who was stuck on this 8 hours idea. And so he said to me, we were working together, and he said, "Don't you worry, Michael." He said, "I get 8 hours every night." And I'm like, "Well, are they the same 8 or are they different?" And he was like, "Oh, they're different every night." And I'm like, "Bruh, that's not good quality." Because what he would do is he would say, whatever time I go to bed, I'm going to set an alarm for 8 hours later, and I'm going to force myself to stay in bed to get that 8 hours of sleep. That's a great idea when only quantity matters.
Right.
But when quality matters, it doesn't work that way, right?
Yeah,
So,
no, and the thing, like, I mean, that's one thing that I love about the Aura Ring too, is that it calls you on shit. It's like, you know what? Your optimum bedtime is 8:36. You went to bed at 9:14 last night and you suffered a little bit,
Right.
and that's really interesting to watch. So, okay, things like Aura Rings, things like we're evolving technologically.
Oh,
How
yeah.
has our understanding of sleep and dreams evolved over the last decade or so?
Wow. So unbelievably, the thing that I really enjoy most about sleep and being in the field is that literally every month, some new discovery comes out about sleep. People have to realize, like, sleep is a fairly new field of medicine. The very first sleep lab, I believe, was in 1945 or 7 in Walla Walla, Washington. So, like, when you think about that, like, Hippocrates was like 3,000 years ago. Starting medicine. So when you start to think about it, like, we're really in the early stages of this. And so there's a lot to learn still. And I enjoy that aspect tremendously, because there's so many aspects. I mean, let's be fair. Sleep's a big topic, right? There's 88 different sleep disorders out there, and I like to talk a lot about not just sleep disorders, but what I call disordered sleep, right? Which is just waking up and feeling like crap. Like, how do I avoid that? Like, I don't have apnea, I don't have narcolepsy, but I have crappy sleep. Like, what do I do with that? I think that's a real interesting area. And I think more and more research is going to go forward, because of trackers like the Aura and the Whoop and all these others that are out there. People are now starting to kind of start to understand that there are metrics by which we can measure our success or failure at sleep.
So what role is technology now playing in modern sleep medicine?
Well, I mean, it's interesting. So in sleep medicine, technology has played a role since it started, because basically what two guys did was they walked around the hospital and they grabbed every machine that they could find. They found an EEG machine, they found an EKG machine, they found an EMG machine. They put them all together and they stuck them on somebody and wanted to see what was going to happen all night long. So, it's a very interesting field to start to understand like what's happening from a technology standpoint. So in the medicine side, we've always been heavy tech. But in the like diagnosable side, like the I just sleep like crap side, I think the trackers are what we're seeing moving forward. But here's the problem with most trackers is they don't tell you what the data means, and that's so frustrating for most people. Like I keep, calling up Aura and saying, hey, let's create a library of videos to teach people what each one of these little profiles means. But they don't want to, diagnose anybody with anything. And I keep telling them you're not gonna, but I think that's kind of the most.
I would be very happy if they made that change.
Right? It would just, because it would make sense, because it's like, I'm getting this data, but I'm not a fucking sleep doctor.
I feel like when I look at, and I look at my data every morning,
Right.
like, cause I'm curious, but it is just scratching the surface. I don't actually know what most of it means. And it's those like, so we already talked about how like REM behavior disorder was a precursor to Parkinson's.
Right.
So what other, because this is something where things like the Aura Ring could really help. Like what are the sleep patterns that indicate underlying health conditions?
Mm-hmm. So there's a few actually. And so one of the things that we look at, for example, is depression. So one of the things that we know about depression as it relates to sleep is that many people who have official depression, like major depressive episode, they actually have a very early REM period. So as an example, you would see REM happening within 30, 40 minutes of the night. That's not normal. REM shouldn't show up until 90 to 120 minutes of the night. So that's one example of something that we might see. One of the things that I'm trying to do, which I think is kind of interesting, is as an example, Aura has partnered with a glucose, like the glucose monitors that people have. Yeah. And so you can start to learn what your sugar does at different stages of sleep.
Yeah, that's great.
And that's going to be really, I think that's going to be mind-blowingly interesting. We're at the early stages, so I don't want to overpromise and underdeliver. I would say right now, trackers are kind of good for monitoring. What I tell people to do is just look for a trend, right? So if you only got 3 minutes of deep sleep one night, I don't think I care. And even if you got 3 minutes every single night, it means that the device is being consistently inaccurate, right? Which is fine. I mean, it's a line, right? And so what I would say is when you go from 3 minutes to 511 to 247, I want to know what happened on those nights, right? Because that's where I think the learnings are going to be. So folks shouldn't focus so much on the actual number, but the delta or the change in the number over time, I think is really where the goodies are going to lie.
What's the most challenging case that you ever had, and how did you deal with it?
Oh, okay. So I'll tell you one of my most challenging cases. And so it was a friend of mine who came to me, and she was a terrible insomniac. And she's been a terrible insomniac for years and years and years. And we've been on committees together and things like that. She's a writer. I tried everything, okay? I tried cognitive behavioral therapy. We tried medication. We tried supplementation. Nothing was working. I couldn't get her to go to sleep. I couldn't get her to wake up on time. It was a mess, right? And so I ended up saying to her, bring her back in for an interview, saying, okay, I've screwed up. What have I missed? And during the process of the interview, she said something to me that was so fascinating. She said, this is when I was practicing in Georgia. She said, if I just lived in California, everything would be perfect. And I'm like, what do you mean? And she was like, well, if I had a 3-hour lag, like my life would be great. If I could get up at 8 a.m. California time, which is really 11 o'clock East Coast time, I don't think I'd have a problem at all. And I was like, well, why don't you do that? And she was like, well, I'm pretty sure my boss would fire me. I'm pretty sure my husband and my kids wouldn't be too happy with it. And I don't see how it would work. And I was like, well, can we run an experiment to see what happens? Because I was out of options, bro. Like I didn't know what else to do. And so she's like, to be honest with you, I think I'm going to get fired. So I was like, can I call your boss? So I called her boss and I said, hey, I'm working with this person. Do you mind if she comes in instead of at 8 o'clock, she comes in at 11 and stays, until let's say 7 or 8. And he was like, I don't really care what she does. I'm firing her on Friday. I was like, oh shit, no pressure. I was like, okay, great. So we worked with her. We changed everything. I call him on Friday. As he picks up the phone, he says, is this Dr. Breus? I was like, yeah. He said, I have 3 more employees I want you to talk to.
That's amazing.
And that was interesting because I as a doctor, we're not perfect, like not even close, right? I mean, some things are really hard to treat. And she was a stumper for me in particular. And I will also tell you that she was part of the impetus for my 3rd book, The Power of When. When do you go to bed? When do you wake up? And she really helped me learn a lot more about these things called chronotypes, which is kind of one of the things that I'm known for. So it was a tough lesson to learn, because you're sitting there and you're like, what could this be? Like, you want to start to say, oh, this person's just, they've got a mental health issue or something like that's going on. I don't need to treat it. No, it wasn't. It was that they were a really, really late night owl. Turns out they were what I call a super wolf. So they like to stay up until 2 o'clock in the morning every single night. And that was kind of how their system worked. Once we got that system working within that context and the family knew, it worked out great.
How do cultural attitudes towards sleep vary? And
Interesting question.
Impact sleep globally?
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, like if you just go south from the United States and you go into Latin America, they have this thing called a siesta almost every day.
I take a siesta every day.
And I love it. I think it makes a lot of sense. Believe it or not, there's actually a biological reason why we take siestas, which is our core body temperature has a very slight drop between 1 and 3 in the afternoon, and it releases just a little bit of melatonin, which is one of the reasons why we like to sleep between 1 and 3 in the afternoon. So like Latin American countries, they sleep very differently. There are some countries like in like Africa where it's called the family bed. And everybody in the family sleeps in the same bed. So mother, father, siblings, aunts, uncles, like it's a room with a large, and sometimes it's a room with like 3 major beds in it. And like all the kids sleep in one bed, all the adults sleep in another bed. That's another cultural aspect to sleep that's very interesting. And then there's just also cultural aspects to bedtime. If you go to Japan, like the number 2 place for sleeping pill prescriptions in the world is Japan. Number 1 is the United States, right? So that has a tendency to be a very work society. And a lot of those people, they don't even go home to sleep. You can actually rent these tubes.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And you just shove yourself in, you sleep for 8 hours, you pull yourself out, you take a shower, and you go right back to work. So I think there's a lot of different cultural aspects. And one thing I want to be super clear about is there's no right or wrong answer here. Right? It's how are you comfortable and how are you getting good quality sleep? If you sleep really well with your entire family in the bed with you, go for it. Like it doesn't bother me at all,
All right. The last question. What do you, in your opinion, because obviously you're not a psychic is the word.
I am not a psychic. No.
So in your opinion, what is the future of sleep medicine?
Great question. So here's what I think is going to start happening on the medicine side and then on the other side. On the medicine side, one of the big problems that we have is there seems to be a bottleneck of getting patients into sleep laboratories and getting patients to sleep doctors. There's about 5,000 sleep doctors across the United States. Everybody I know is jammed. Everybody's seeing 20, 30 patients a day. And they only have a certain number of beds to do sleep studies in.
Right.
And so what I would say is going to be happening, I would say probably within the next 5 years easily, is these trackers that we've got out there are going to become diagnostic. And so what'll happen is I think they'll probably become FDA cleared over the course of time. I think one just was recently. And you'll be able to actually get a sleep study done in your home that will be equally as accurate as if it were with all the crazy equipment.
Well, I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. Because I think what that does is that kind of democratizes sleep, right? Because at that point, like several of the barriers to entry kind of go by the wayside. Number one, the cost goes down tremendously. Like if all you did is put a strap or a ring on somebody, it costs a lot less than attaching 27 electrodes, having a full-time person there all night long. Like you can imagine the cost structure is going to change almost instantly. But accuracy, we are now starting to get such accuracy from the models that are being produced from the data that we're collecting. And with AI moving forward, I would argue that we will also start to see that even during the doctor visit, doctors will start to be able to find even more obscure diagnoses, like things that they didn't know that you could possibly have. I think that we'll also probably find some new sleep disorders. There's one that's pretty much already started called orthosomnia, where people now look at their data so much that they don't sleep.
Oh no.
Yeah,
That's just a snake eating its tail.
exactly. So I think the medicine side is going to improve. I think I would love to see it if we slowed down or even stopped the world's dependence on sleeping pills. I think that is really important over the course of time. And don't get me wrong, if you're on a sleeping med, that is a relationship between you and your doctor, and that might be exactly where you need to be. But what I can tell you is when you're on sleeping meds for extended periods of time, 10, 12, 15 years, it's going to have an effect on your cognition. I mean,
it would have.
There's no way it's not. Right?
I took Ambien exactly one time, and I was like, yeah, I'm not going to do that again.
Yeah. And for some people, Ambien's a lifesaver, and that's okay, right? As long as you're not escalating in dosage, as long as you're using it appropriately, it's a medicine, right? But there's too many people out there who they can't sleep without a pill, and that's not good. And same on the supplement side, by the way. Like if you can't fall asleep without having 12 grams of magnesium, the likelihood is you don't need 12 grams of magnesium, right? So I think there's a lot of that's going on the non-traditional side of medicine. I think that's where we're going to start to see some very interesting things. Supplementation, I think, has got some value to it. If you are deficient in magnesium, vitamin D, melatonin, or iron, I can assure you, you will not sleep well. So, I think hopefully people will start focusing more on some of that, on that side of things, and just relaxing a little bit. Like, here's the thing: everybody knows how to sleep. Everybody, right? Like, come on! Like, this is inside your brain. This is genetic. You just got the world just got too complicated.
The world did get complicated, and people need to learn to unplug a little more, maybe with a good book.
Yeah, absolutely. So now we're back to the sleeper, right? And so for everybody out there, this was a super fun attempt for us to get together and use some real science and have some fun.
Well, anything to say in closing, or was that it?
I just want to tell everybody that hopefully, and if any of you out there have the dream of writing a fiction book that's way outside of your comfort zone, you should do it. You should give it a shot, because I really enjoyed it, and it's been meaningful for me to be able to combine my two passions and be able to put something out that hopefully people will enjoy.
Yeah, I feel like writing is the best form of therapy and getting to know yourself. And I don't know how I think about something until it's on the page. And so it's an extremely valuable thing. And thank you all for reading, and thank you all for listening, and have a great day. And I hope you have a great night's sleep.
And sweet dreams from the Sleep Doctor.
Adios.